There's a kind of silence that doesn't mean peace. It means something is watching you. It sits in the corners of rooms, behind the eyes of people who smile too long, inside the pauses of conversations that end just a little too fast. Most people never learn to hear that silence. They go through their whole lives thinking quiet means safe. Kareem Hassan learned the difference at age 9, when he watched his father come home from the palace gates with a look on his face that had no name. Not fear exactly, not grief exactly, but something underneath both of those things, something older. His father never talked about what he saw inside those walls. He just sat at the kitchen table, drank his tea, and stared at the wall like it owed him an answer. Kareem grew up watching that wall too. Now he stood in front of a different wall, the eastern perimeter of the royal palace of Al Hassan, 15 feet of white stone that had absorbed 40 years of sun and secrets, and he felt that same nameless thing move through him like a cold hand pressed flat against his chest. Something was wrong. He couldn't say what. That was the part that kept gnawing at him as he did his morning round at 4:47 a.m., boots quiet on the marble path, rifle at his side, the palace grounds spread out around him in the blue-black dark of pre-dawn. Everything looked exactly as it should. The cameras were angled correctly. The sensor lights on the east garden wall were still and green. The overnight logbook showed nothing unusual. A food delivery truck at 11:40 p.m. cleared and signed off by Senior Guard Fawzi al-Rashid. A maintenance crew departure at 1:15 a.m. and then nothing until Kareem himself clocked in at 4. Clean, orderly, fine. And yet, he stopped walking, stood in the middle of the east path, and just listened. The fountain near the rose garden ran in its usual rhythm. Somewhere far off, a dog barked twice and went quiet. The flag above the central palace building moved in a breath of wind. Then it stopped. The wind stopped. The fountain kept going. The flag hung dead still. And Kareem smelled it. Faint, chemical, barely there, something synthetic and wrong in the middle of jasmine and stone dust and the clean morning air of the desert. Like someone had opened a bottle of something in a room far away and just a ghost of it had traveled. He stood there for 4 seconds, counted them. His training said, don't chase ghosts. His training said, document anomalies, report through proper channels, do not act on feeling alone. He had 16 months on this post. He had never once filed an unsubstantiated report. He was known for being quiet, precise, reliable, the kind of guard the senior officers liked because he never caused complications. He pulled out his radio. Control. This is Hassan, Eastern Perimeter. I'm picking up an unidentified chemical odor near the rose garden wall. Requesting permission to do a secondary sweep of the maintenance corridor. Static. A pause. Hassan, overnights were clean. Fawzi signed off at 0115. You're probably getting fertilizer runoff from the garden service. Understood. Requesting the sweep anyway. Another pause. Longer this time. You've got 10 minutes. Don't go past the inner corridor gate. He went. The maintenance corridor ran along the inside of the eastern wall, a narrow service path used by groundskeeping crews, electricians, the occasional plumber. It was not glamorous. It smelled like damp stone and old motor oil and the ghost of 1,000 lunches eaten standing up by men who had nowhere better to be. The overhead lights were motion-activated fluorescents that flickered on in sections as Kareem walked, illuminating each 10-foot stretch just ahead of him like the palace itself was reluctantly lighting his way. He found nothing in the first 50 meters, nothing in the second. At the 80-meter mark, he found a door that was not quite closed. It was the door to Sub-Storage Unit 4, a small room used to keep groundskeeping chemicals, fertilizer bags, spare irrigation parts. It was supposed to be locked. It was always locked. Kareem had walked past this door 200 times in 16 months, and it had never been anything other than locked. The padlock was on the ground. Not broken, not cut, set down neatly, like someone had removed it with a key and placed it on the stone floor with the particular care of a person who intended to come back. He stood at the threshold and didn't go in. Not yet. He pulled out his phone and took a photo of the padlock on the ground. Took a photo of the door. Then, he radioed control again. I have an unsecured storage unit on the maintenance corridor. Sub-storage 4. The lock is off the door. I need backup before I proceed. Hassan, Fozzie signs off every storage unit on the overnight checklist. Then, Fozzie's checklist is wrong. I'm standing in front of an open lock. The silence on the other end of the radio was different this time. Heavier. The kind of silence that means someone is deciding something they don't want to decide at 4:52 in the morning. Stay where you are. I am Sendin Darwish. Guard Tarek Darwish arrived in 4 minutes, which in palace security terms was either very fast or very slow, depending on how bad the situation turned out to be. He was a big man, older than Kareem by 8 years, with a face like worn leather and a habit of chewing the inside of his cheek when he was thinking hard. He looked at the door, looked at the lock on the floor, looked at Kareem. "You smell that?" Kareem said. Tarek breathed in. His jaw stopped moving. "Yeah." They went in together. The room was 8 by 10 feet, shelving units along 3 walls, a bare bulb overhead that buzzed when it came on. The chemical smell was stronger here, not overwhelming, not the kind of thing that would knock you down, but present and wrong the way a wrong note in a familiar song is present and wrong, the kind of thing your body registers before your mind catches up. The fertilizer bags were stacked against the far wall. Standard agricultural bags, green and white, the palace's usual supplier logo printed on the front. Kareem had seen these bags his entire working life. They were completely ordinary, except 3 of them were stacked in a different pattern than the rest. All the others were in the standard 2 columns across arrangement. These 3 were lined up in a single row, flush against the wall, perfectly aligned in a way that looked deliberate rather than casual. Tarek grabbed the top bag. It was light, far too light. He looked at Kareem. Kareem looked at him. Tarek set it down on the floor and pressed his hand against the side of it, and the bag shifted under his palm in a way that fertilizer didn't shift. They opened it. It was not fertilizer. Inside the bag, packed in black foam cut to shape, were 3 glass cylinders sealed with rubber stoppers, each one the length of a man's forearm. The liquid inside was clear. Kareem's first thought was water. His second thought, arriving half a second behind the first like a messenger who had run too hard to get there, was that water didn't come packed in custom-cut foam inside a fertilizer bag inside a locked storage room in a royal palace at 5 in the morning. His third thought came with a cold clarity that pushed everything else out of the way. This was the beginning of something that had already been in motion for much longer than tonight. He didn't touch the cylinders. Neither did Tarek. They both stepped back from the bag simultaneously, which would have looked almost choreographed to anyone watching, and Kareem got back on his radio with a voice that was completely level because the fear had gone somewhere deeper than his voice could reach. "Control, this is Hassan. I need the duty commander. Now, sub-storage 4, Eastern Maintenance Corridor. Do not send anyone else. Give me the commander." The response came back in 30 seconds. "Commander Al-Mukhtar Ish en route. Stand by." They stood by. Kareem looked at Tarek. Tarek was chewing the inside of his cheek again. The fluorescent bulb buzzed overhead. Somewhere above them, through 16 feet of stone and marble and sleeping palace, the people this was meant for were in their beds, breathing the clean desert air, not knowing that the thing waiting for them had already arrived and was sitting in a foam-lined fertilizer bag in a room that was supposed to be locked. Kareem thought about his father at the kitchen table. That look on his face. The wall that owed him an answer. He thought, "I finally understand what you were seeing, Baba." He thought, "I'm not going to let it happen." Commander Al-Mukhtar arrived at 5:08 a.m. He was a small man in his late 50s with silver hair and the kind of economy of movement that meant he had stopped wasting time on panic somewhere around his 40th year of service. He looked at the bag. He looked at the cylinders. He did not touch them. He looked at Kareem for a long moment. "What made you come down here?" "A smell, sir." "And a feeling." The commander was quiet. Not skeptical quiet, thinking quiet. "A feeling." "Yes, sir." "Tell me everything from the beginning. Every detail. Don't clean it up." So Kareem told him. The smell in the East Garden. The flag going still. The unlocked door. The wrong pattern bags. He told it the way his father had never told anything. Straight through, nothing held back, every small detail laid out in the open where it could be examined. The commander listened without interrupting. When Kareem finished, the older man was quiet for another long moment. Then he said, "The food delivery truck from 1140. Who cleared it?" "Fawzi al-Rashid, sir." Something moved behind the commander's eyes. Not surprise. Something that looked like the confirmation of a suspicion he had been carrying for longer than tonight. He reached for his own radio, not the palace frequency. A different one. Private channel. Whatever he said into it, he said quietly, "Turn away," his voice below the buzz of the overhead bulb. When he turned back, his face had settled into a stillness that Kareem recognized from his father's kitchen table. That nameless thing. Not fear. Not grief. Something older. "You, and Darwish. You don't leave this corridor. You don't speak to anyone. You don't make any calls." "Yes, sir." "Hassan. Sir, you did the right thing tonight." It was not a compliment. It was something else, heavier, more specific. The acknowledgement of a man who had seen things go the other way, who knew what it looked like when someone with a feeling decided it wasn't worth the trouble to follow it. Kareem nodded, stood where he was. The corridor was quiet again. The bulb buzzed. Tarek chewed his cheek. Outside, in the palace above them, no one knew that the morning had already been saved. But the night was not over yet, not even close, and what was sitting in those 3 glass cylinders was only the surface of it. The real thing was still hidden, and it had a human face. The thing about working inside a palace is that every room has a version of events it is willing to show you, and a version it keeps in the walls. Most people who worked inside Al Hassan Royal Palace believed they understood the place. They knew their corridors, their checkpoints, their shifts. They knew which senior staff member took 3 sugars in their tea, and which one had a temper before noon, and which security camera on the north wing had a 4-second lag in its rotation. They thought knowing those things meant knowing the palace. Kareem had believed that too, until this morning. By 6 a.m., the maintenance corridor had become a different world. The Royal Intelligence Service had arrived in vehicles with no markings, and men with no visible identification who nonetheless moved through the palace grounds with the authority of people who owned everything they stood on. They brought equipment in black cases. They spoke to each other in half sentences. They set up a perimeter around sub-storage for that Kareem and Tarek were now technically outside of, which meant they were standing in the narrow corridor with their backs against the opposite wall, too close to leave and too far to hear anything useful. Tarek had stopped chewing his cheek. He was just staring at the wall across from him with the blank expression of a man processing something too large to process, standing up. "You ever seen anything like this?" he asked. "No," Kareem said. "Me neither." A pause. "Fawzi. You think Fawzi did this?" Kareem didn't answer. He had been thinking about Fawzi al-Rashid for the last hour, had been turning the man over in his mind the way you turn a coin over looking for something different on the back, something that explains why the front doesn't make sense. Fawzi was 43 years old. He had been with the palace guard for 19 years. He had a wife and 2 daughters. His oldest daughter had just been accepted to study medicine at the university in the capital. Fawzi had talked about it for weeks, quietly, in that modest way some men have when they are privately bursting with pride, but were raised to show less than they feel. He was not the kind of man you would invent if you were inventing a traitor. But then, again, that was the point, wasn't it? The men who betrayed things were never the ones you invented. They were always the ones who were already there, who knew the corridors and the shift rotations and which camera had a 4-second lag, who had 19 years of trust built up like a wall of sandbags between themselves and suspicion. At 6:23 a.m., a man in a plain gray suit came out of sub-storage 4 and walked directly to Kareem. "You're Hassan." "Yes." "Come with me." They went to a different room, a small meeting space off the main corridor, the kind of room used for shift handovers with a folding table and for plastic chairs and a whiteboard on the wall that had someone's rotation schedule half erased on it. The man in gray sat across from Kareem and set a tablet on the table between them. On the tablet screen was a photograph. "Do you know this man?" The man in the photograph was sitting at a cafe table somewhere, mid-laugh, a glass of tea in his hand, his face half turned toward the camera as if he'd been caught mid-sentence. He was in his 40s, ordinary looking. A face you would not remember if you passed it in a market. No, Kareem said. Look carefully. Kareem looked. He looked at the jaw, the nose, the set of the eyes. He looked at the hand around the glass. He looked at the way the man was sitting, posture forward, weight on his elbows, the body language of a person who was very comfortable in their own company. Then he saw it, not in the face, in the left forearm, a small scar, pale and curved, the shape of a fishhook just below the elbow. I've seen that scar, Kareem said. The man in gray was very still. Where? The food delivery truck. Last night, I wasn't on shift yet. I came in at 4, but in the morning briefing, Fozzie mentioned the delivery. Said one of the delivery team had a scar on his arm. Asked if anyone else had noted it because it wasn't on his ID photo. He brought it up himself. Said he'd flagged it in the log. He flagged it. Yes. I read the log. He noted it as minor physical anomaly. Cross-referenced. No concern flagged. The man in gray put the tablet down. His face was unreadable in the way that faces are unreadable when a lot of activity is happening underneath them. He wrote something in a small notebook. He wrote it without looking at Kareem, and Kareem had the sudden and specific feeling of being inside a much larger machine. The feeling that everything he said was a piece being placed into a picture that had been forming without him for a very long time. The cylinders, Kareem said. What's in them? The man in gray looked up. He studied Kareem for a moment in the same way Kareem had studied the photograph, looking for something specific, running some kind of internal calculation. Then he said, You don't need that detail. I think I do. I'm the one who found them. I need to understand what I found. Another pause. The man in gray set his pen down. A compound designed to be introduced through the ventilation system, he said. Slow acting. Colorless. No odor in the quantities involved. It would have presented as a medical event, a respiratory episode, possibly cardiac involvement at higher concentrations. By the time anyone understood what had happened, it would have looked like illness. The word illness sat in the room, between them like something dropped from a height. Kareem thought about the ventilation access in the palace's central wing. The maintenance corridor connected to it. Substorage was 30 meters from the access panel. A person with a key and a knowledge of the schedule could have done the whole thing in under 4 minutes. When was it supposed to happen? He asked. This morning. The Majlis. The full royal council convenes at 10 a.m. in the central hall. Every senior member of the royal family and the council in one room. He paused. Everyone. Kareem did the arithmetic on that without wanting to. 11 members of the royal family. 14 council ministers. Security staff, aides, protocol officers. A room of 60 or 70 people in a hall with a single shared ventilation circuit. Fozzie, Kareem said. Not a question. We don't know the full extent of his involvement yet. He flagged the scar. He put in the log. He wrote no concern, but he made sure someone would read that the man was there. That's not how you help cover something up. That's how you leave a trail you can explain later. The man in gray looked at him for a long moment. You're faster than most. I grew up watching my father come home from these walls with things he couldn't say. I've been trying to understand this place my whole life. The man in gray stood up. Stay available. Don't discuss anything you've seen or heard. If anyone asks why you're still here past your shift, you had a debriefing. That's all you know. He left. Kareem sat in the plastic chair and looked at the half-erased rotation schedule on the whiteboard. At 7:15, Tariq appeared in the doorway. His face was the color of old concrete. He sat down in the chair across from Kareem and put his hands flat on the table like he needed to feel something solid. They took Fozzie, he said. I know. His family. Tariq stopped, pressed his lips together. His daughter just got into medical school. I know. Neither of them spoke for a while. The fluorescent light in this room was the same as the one in the corridor. The same buzz, the same flat brightness that made everything look slightly more real than it wanted to be. If he did this, Tariq said. If he actually let them find out what he did and didn't do, Kareem said. It's not ours to decide. But you think he was involved? Kareem thought about the log entry. The scar noted and dismissed. The padlock placed neatly on the ground. Not thrown, not cut, placed. The specific and careful placement of a man who had done his part exactly as instructed and expected to be finished with it before sunrise. I think someone found something that Fozzie needed, Kareem said, and they used it. And it doesn't matter whether he wanted to help or didn't. They had something on him, and they pressed it until he moved. His daughter's tuition, Tarek said. A flat voice. A conclusion he had already reached, but didn't want to hold alone. Kareem said nothing. At 8:40 a.m., the man in gray came back. This time he had another man with him, older, in a military uniform with insignia that Kareem recognized from the National Security Directorate. This man looked at Kareem the way senior officers look at junior ones when they have decided to tell them something they were not originally clear to hear. Hassan, the uniformed man said, "The 3 cylinders you found were not the full consignment." Kareem's chest tightened. There were supposed to be 5. We have 3. The other 2 were removed from sub-storage for some time between the overnight delivery and your discovery. We believe they were moved to a secondary location inside the palace grounds. Inside the palace. Inside. So someone else is still in here. Or something else is already in place. Kareem stood up. He did it without thinking about it. A body responding to a fact before the mind had properly processed it. The ventilation access panel. The one in the East Wing maintenance shaft. Has it been checked? The uniformed man glanced at the man in gray. Back at Kareem. It's on the list. How far down the list? The answer was in the half-second of silence before the reply came. It was not at the top. In a morning of escalating urgency, with 3 cylinders already secured and a suspect in custody and a massive intelligence apparatus now moving through the palace's arteries, the East Wing maintenance shaft had not been the first priority. "I need to go there now," Kareem said. "I know that corridor. I've walked it every shift for 16 months. I'll know if something has been moved or opened that shouldn't have been." The 2 men looked at each other. The uniformed one gave a single small nod. "You go with an intelligence officer. You point. You don't touch." Understood. The officer assigned to him was a young woman who introduced herself as only Samira and carried her weapon with the ease of someone who had stopped noticing it years ago. She moved fast and quiet and gave Kareem the distinct impression that she was tolerating his involvement with professional grace rather than enthusiasm. They went to the East Wing maintenance shaft. The access panel was a metal door, gray painted, set into the wall of the sub-corridor 2 levels below the palace's main floor. It required a specialized tool to open, a kind of large-headed key that maintenance teams carried. Kareem had seen this door opened exactly twice in 16 months, both times for scheduled HVAC inspections. The paint around the lock was scratched. New scratches. Bright metal showing through the gray in thin lines that could only come from recent, forceful use of the wrong tool. Samira saw it the same moment he did. She had her radio out before either of them said a word. Kareem stood in front of the scratched paint and thought, they're already in, or they were already in, and they're already out, and what they left behind is sitting in the darkness on the other side of this door right now, waiting for 10 o'clock. He thought, 3 hours. The Majlis begins in 3 hours. He thought, this is not over. And standing there, 16 months of quiet rounds and unremarkable logbooks and careful, unassuming reliability pressing behind him like something he had been building without knowing what it was for. He understood that everything in his life had been practiced for exactly this corridor, this door this morning. He didn't move. He didn't touch anything. He waited the way his father had waited at that kitchen table, but with one difference. He was not going to let the wall keep its secret this time. The access panel opened inward on a darkness that breathed. That was how it felt to Kareem, like the shaft exhaled when they unsealed it, a slow exhalation of recycled air and metal dust and something else underneath those things that his body registered as danger before his mind assembled a word for it. The shaft was roughly 4 feet wide, running horizontally through the palace's interior east wall before branching up into the main ventilation trunk that fed the central hall above. It was the circulatory system of the building, the invisible infrastructure through which the palace breathed in and breathed out, pushing air through every room, every corridor, every chamber where powerful men sat and made decisions that shaped millions of lives. Samira had her weapon up. A second intelligence officer, she had called for backup without Kareem hearing the exact words, was on her left. Both of them had lights attached to their weapons, dual white beams cutting into the shaft's dark throat. Kareem stood behind them, pointing, not touching. His light was just his phone, civilian, inadequate, trembling slightly because his hand was not perfectly steady and he was not going to pretend otherwise. The shaft's interior was lined with galvanized metal duct, standard construction, riveted seams, dust accumulated in the corners in the way that things accumulate when no one has looked at them for a while. The last HVAC inspection had been 4 months ago. There was a paper tag zip-tied to the inner wall near the entrance with the inspection date and the technician's initials. The paper tag was torn on one side. Fresh tear. White paper exposed in a straight line where it had been caught and dragged by something moving through the shaft. Something that had not been careful enough, or had been in too much of a hurry to care about a paper tag. Here, Kareem said. Samira looked where he pointed. Radioed something in a low voice. Kept moving. They went in 2 meters. 3. At the 4-meter mark, the shaft branched. Left branch ran toward the central hall's upper ventilation feed. The heart of the building's air supply, the single most effective delivery point for anything you wanted distributed through the palace simultaneously. Right branch ran toward the secondary circuit, the one that fed the administrative and residential wings. Left branch. Samira's light hit it first. The cylinder was there, wedged against the far inner wall of the left branch, maybe 60 centimeters into the fork, positioned against the metal with a small device attached to its rubber stopper, a timer mechanism, black plastic, its display face turned toward the wall, so the numbers wouldn't be visible to a casual light sweep from the entrance. The timer was connected to a thin pin through the stopper center. When the timer hit 0, the pin would pull. The stopper would unseal. The clock on the display read 2 hours, 41 minutes, and 17 seconds. 2 hours. 41 minutes, 17 seconds, then 16, then 15. Kareem was aware that he had stopped breathing. He was aware of Samira's hand coming up flat and palm out toward him without looking, stay back. And he was aware of the way time the shaft felt differently than time in the open, compressed, and specific, each second its own separate object. The second cylinder was not visible. Samira's partner moved forward on his stomach, light sweeping the shaft in slow arcs, and found it at the 6-meter mark. Further in, same timer mechanism, same positioning. This one read 2 hours, 41 minutes, and 2 seconds. 14 seconds earlier than the first. 2 timers, set slightly off from each other. Redundancy. If one mechanism failed, the other would not. Whoever had built this was thorough. Kareem stood at the shaft entrance and thought about that thorough person. The mind that had planned this had calculated delivery points and timer sequencing and had chosen a fertilizer bag as a container because it was ordinary enough to be invisible and it was the last thing a palace guard would look at twice. The mind that had found Fawzi al-Rashid had identified his vulnerability, a daughter's dream, a father's love, money that a guard's salary couldn't produce, and had pressed on exactly that point with exactly the right amount of pressure to make a 19-year man do a single terrible thing at a specific moment, and then walk away from it with a log entry that would either protect him or destroy him, depending on how the morning went. That mind was somewhere, in the city, watching its phone, waiting for confirmation. The bomb disposal team arrived at 8:57 a.m. For people in full gear, a fifth in plain clothes who carried nothing and directed everything, moving through the subcorridor with a speed and density of purpose that made the air in the narrow space feel physically heavier. They spoke in technical shorthand that Kareem caught fragments of: delay, initiator, positive pull pin, redundant seal, the vocabulary of a discipline that existed specifically for the moments when thorough evil met trained patience. Kareem and Samira were moved back to the corridor entrance. 20 meters away, then 30. A junior officer came and stood with them, not as a guard exactly, but as a presence, someone to absorb the waiting with. At 9:11 a.m., one of the disposal team came to the shaft entrance and said something in his radio that made the plainclothes coordinator exhale once through his nose. Barely anything. Not a sound really, just an exhalation. And Kareem read it as good news the way you read someone's posture as good news when you can't hear what they're saying. At 9:19, the second timer was neutralized. In the corridor, with the sound of the plainclothes coordinator making calls in a low voice, and the light from the sub-corridor's fluorescent bulb buzzing the same note it always buzzed, Kareem leaned against the wall and let his weight settle into the stone. Samira stood beside him. She had put her weapon back in its holster. She looked at him sideways. "You've been on this post 16 months, she said. "Yes. And you picked up a chemical trace in an open garden and tracked it to a locked room and called the commander at 5 in the morning over a feeling." "Yes." She was quiet for a moment. "That kind of instinct is trained, or it isn't. My father was palace security. He did 22 years. She nodded. Did not press it. She seemed like a person who understood that some things were answered completely by the simplest version of them. The Majlis convened at 10 a.m. as scheduled. 63 people in the central hall of Al Hassin Royal Palace, the royal family and their ministers and their advisors, the full assembly of a nation's leadership sitting in gilded chairs in a room that a few hours earlier had been 4 minutes away from becoming something history would call a massacre. They did not know that. They drank their coffee and discussed agriculture reform and infrastructure spending and the protocol arrangements for a visiting delegation from the East, and none of them ever felt the nearness of the thing that had been meant for them. That was the right outcome. That was how it was supposed to go. The people in that room were not supposed to carry the weight of their own near death. That weight belonged to the men and women who stood between them and it. Kareem was still in the sub-corridor when the 10 o'clock hour passed. He heard nothing from above. No confirmation, no signal, no acknowledgement from the palace above that the world had continued normally because of what had happened in the building's basement this morning. But he knew. The way you know a storm has passed when the air pressure changes and the birds come back. At 10:34 a.m., the uniformed officer from the National Security Directorate came back. He looked at Kareem the way he had looked at him the first time, evaluating, but with something different in it now, something that had resolved into a specific and unambiguous conclusion. The network responsible for this morning, the officer said, has been in operation for at least 2 years. 3 known members have been apprehended as of this hour. The central coordinator is being tracked. He paused. Fawzi al-Rashid cooperated fully once he understood the scope of what had been planned. He believed he was participating in a protest operation, symbolic disruption, non-harmful. He was deceived. Kareem thought about Fawzi's daughter, her acceptance letter, the careful, modest pride of a father who was raised to show less than he felt. He thought, they always find a thing that a man would do anything to protect, and then they pointed at him like a weapon. What happens to him? Kareem asked. That's not determined yet. He left a trail in the log. He documented the delivery team's scar. He didn't have to do that. I know. The officer's face was still. It will be considered. It was not enough, and it was everything available. Kareem accepted it. At 11:05 a.m., 7 hours and 18 minutes after he had first smelled something wrong in the East Garden, Kareem Hassan walked out of the palace's Easter maintenance gate into the morning sun. He had been on shift since 4. He had not eaten. He had not sat down for more than 20 minutes in the entire span of the morning. He was tired in a way that had no specific location in his body. It was distributed everywhere, a general tiredness that felt honest and earned and not unwelcome. He stood in the service parking area outside the gate and breathed the open air. The sun was high now, the desert morning burning off into full heat, the white stone of the palace wall luminous and solid behind him. He thought about that wall. All his life, it had been the thing his father came home from, the place that took things from men and gave nothing back except salary and silence. He had grown up with a complicated relationship to it, drawn to it, shaped by it, choosing it as a career, and then spending 16 months wondering if he had made the choice because he wanted to or because some deeper gravity had made it for him. He understood now that the distinction didn't matter. He had been exactly where he needed to be. He had been the right person in the right corridor at the right moment, and the morning had gone one way instead of another because of it, and 63 people in a gilded room upstairs had no idea that their ordinary Tuesday had been anything other than ordinary. That was the job, not the glory of it, the invisibility of it, the good work that disappeared into the unchanged morning. His phone buzzed. A text from his mother. "Are you coming for dinner tonight? I made rice with the almonds the way you like." He looked at the text for a moment. Then he typed back, "Yes. Save me a big plate." He put the phone in his pocket. He walked to his car. He sat in it for a moment with the windows down and the dry morning air moving through and the palace wall in the rearview mirror, solid and white and full of its secrets. And he thought, not all of them. Not today. Today, one of them is mine. He drove home. Behind him, the flag above the central building moved in the morning wind. And this time, it kept moving. In the months that followed, the network responsible for the Al-Hassin plot was dismantled across 3 countries. 7 individuals were prosecuted. Fawzi al-Rashid, in recognition of his cooperation and the evidence trail he had deliberately preserved in the palace log, received a reduced sentence. His daughter enrolled in medical school the following autumn. Karim Hassan was promoted to senior guard first class. He declined a position in the intelligence division. He still does the eastern perimeter round every morning. He still stops in the middle of the path and listens. The flag moves. The fountain runs. He walks on.